"You are an embarrassment to my name. Stay in the car," Nathaniel Carter said it without even looking at her. His hand was already on the door handle of the ballroom entrance. His jaw set, his eyes fixed straight ahead on the cameras, on the investors, on the world he had built and the image he refused to let her touch. Amelia sat in the back of that black car in the dark, in her carefully pressed dress, and listened to the door click shut. Through the tinted window, she watched her husband of 11 years walk into a room full of people who had never been told she existed. If that broke your heart, wait until you hear the rest of this story. Please subscribe to our channel, hit the notification bell, and follow Amelia's journey all the way to the end. And drop a comment telling us what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story has traveled. The night everything finally cracked open, it was raining in Manhattan. Not the kind of gentle rain that makes the city look romantic in movies. This was a hard, punishing rain that slapped the windows of the Carter penthouse on the 42nd floor and made the whole building feel like it was holding its breath. Amelia Carter stood in the kitchen in her robe, her hands wrapped around a mug of chamomile tea that had gone cold 20 minutes ago, and she listened to the sound of her husband getting ready for a party she had not been invited to. She could hear him in the master bedroom, the sound of the closet opening, the soft drag of hangers, the particular way he exhaled when he was tying his cufflinks, that small grunt of concentration she had memorized over 11 years of marriage. She knew his sounds better than he knew his own. She knew the sound he made when he was pleased with himself. She knew the sound he made when a business deal had gone wrong. She knew the sound of his footsteps when he was coming to find her, and sound of his trying to leave without being noticed. Tonight he was trying to leave without being noticed. She set her mug down on the counter without making a sound. She walked to the doorway of the kitchen and watched him cross the living room. He was wearing the navy suit she had helped him pick out in Milan 2 years ago. His silver cufflinks caught the light, his hair was perfectly combed. He was the most handsome man she had ever known, and he was walking toward the elevator like he lived alone. "Nathaniel." He stopped, then he turned around, and his face did the thing it always did now, that quick, careful rearrangement like a man shuffling cards to hide the one he didn't want you to see. "Amelia," he smiled. "I thought you were asleep." "I wasn't asleep." She crossed her arms. "Where are you going?" "The Harrington Foundation dinner." "I told you about it. You told me it was black tie." She held his gaze. "You didn't tell me I wasn't coming." Something flickered across his face. Regret maybe, or just discomfort. She had spent years trying to tell the difference. "It's a work event," he said. "Investors. It's going to be incredibly boring. I was doing you a favor. You were doing yourself a favor." He exhaled. Set his jaw. "Amelia, don't start." "I'm not starting anything." Her voice was steady. She had learned how to keep it steady. "I'm asking you a question." "Why can't I come to your dinner?" "I already answered that." "No," she said quietly. "You gave me a reason. That's not the same thing." He looked at her for a long moment. And in that moment, she saw it, the real answer, the one he would never say out loud, living right behind his eyes like a tenant who had been there so long he'd stopped paying rent. Then he picked up his coat from the back of the chair. "I'll be back by midnight," he said, and he was gone. Amelia stood in the middle of her 42nd floor penthouse, surrounded by Italian marble and museum-quality art and every beautiful thing money could buy, and she felt like a woman standing inside a life that had been built for someone else. She walked to the window and looked down at the city below. She could see the lights of the cars moving through the wet streets, 42 floors down, and she thought about how strange it was how a person could be surrounded by everything and still feel the particular cold of being completely alone. She pressed her palm flat against the glass. It was the same cold. She had been feeling it for 3 years now, maybe longer, if she was honest with herself. And tonight, for the first time, she was starting to wonder if she had been lying to herself about how long the cold had been there. She had met Nathaniel Carter when they were both 26 years old, and he was nobody. That was the word people used now when they talked about that time, when they wrote the magazine profiles and the business school case studies. When Nathaniel Carter was nobody, they said it like it was a funny story, like it was the charming prologue to a great American success. But Amelia had been there for the actual version of it, the one that wasn't charming at all. She had been working as an office manager for a small accounting firm in Brooklyn, and Nathaniel had come in to get help filing taxes for a syst-up he'd launched out of his apartment, with $12,000 he'd borrowed from his mother and a business plan he'd typed up on a laptop with a cracked screen. He was nervous. He kept tapping his foot under the desks. He explained his business idea 3 times in a row because he couldn't tell if she understood it or if she was just being polite. I understand it, she told him the third time. It's actually a really good idea. He looked at her like she had said something impossible. You think so? I do. She handed him back his paperwork. Most people who come in here with startup taxes are trying to hide the fact that they have no revenue. You're not hiding anything. That's already better than half of them. He laughed. A real laugh surprised out of him, and it was the most unguarded thing she had ever seen a man do in a business meeting. He called her the next day, not about the taxes. Within 6 months, they were inseparable. He proposed to her in the same Brooklyn apartment where he'd built his company, with a ring he'd saved up for over 4 months, down on one knee on a floor covered in spreadsheets and takeout containers, and he told her she was the only thing he had ever been absolutely certain about. Everything else, he said, holding her hand, I have to think about. I have to calculate. I have to weigh the risks. But you're the one thing in my life I never had to think twice about. She said yes without hesitating. She was the one who helped him draft his investor pitch deck. She was the one who talked him off the ledge at 2 a.m. when his first major deal fell through, and he sat on their kitchen floor, convinced it was over. She was the one who drove him to the hospital when the stress got so bad he thought he was having a heart attack. It was a panic attack, the doctor said, and Amelia sat beside his bed for 4 hours until he fell asleep. And she didn't tell anyone, not even his mother, because he'd asked her not to, and she had kept that secret the way she kept every secret he ever gave her. With both hands, she had believed in Nathaniel Carter before anyone else on earth did. And now she was standing at a window in his penthouse, watching the rain, wondering when exactly he had stopped believing in her. The next morning, she found out about the photograph. It hadn't started as a scandal. These things rarely did. A society blogger had posted photos from the Harrington Foundation dinner, Nathaniel at the center of the frame, surrounded by beautiful, important people, laughing with the easy confidence of a man completely in his element. The comments underneath were predictable. So handsome. What a power couple. Carter Global is unstoppable. Power couple. Amelia scrolled through the photos slowly. Nathaniel with the CEO of a tech company. Nathaniel with a senator. Nathaniel with a woman Amelia didn't recognize, young and slender and dressed in red, who was standing very close to him with her hand on his arm. She told herself it was nothing. She told herself it was a photo, not a confession, but then she read one particular comment from an account called Manhattan Social Scene, which had $47,000 and a verified badge. The comment said, "Does anyone else find it interesting that Nathaniel Carter is always at these events alone? For a married man, he's suspiciously unattached in public. Makes you wonder what he's hiding." Amelia put the phone face down on the breakfast table. She sat very still. She thought about 11 years of dinners he'd attended without her. 11 years of charity events she'd been told were too boring. 11 years of business trips where she wasn't invited, client meetings she wasn't introduced at, industry parties where she arrived to pick him up and waited in the car because he said it would just be 5 minutes. She thought about the way he'd started referring to her at the rare events where she did appear beside him as my associate or someone from the house to people who didn't already know them. She thought about the night, 2 years ago, when his college friend had called unexpectedly, and Nathaniel had answered the phone in the kitchen, and she had heard him say she had heard it clearly. She had been standing right there. "No, I'm not with anyone right now. It's just me," she'd told herself. She'd misheard. She'd told herself a lot of things. "You've lost weight," said Nathaniel's mother. Victoria Carter said it the way some women say it, not as an observation, but as a verdict, like she was confirming something she'd suspected. It was a Sunday afternoon in October, and Amelia had come to Victoria's Upper East Side townhouse for what Victoria called tea, and what was actually a structured interrogation conducted over Earl Grey and small sandwiches with the crusts cut off. Victoria Carter was 72 years old and had been terrifying for every one of them. She wore her silver hair swept back from her face in a way that was either elegant or severe, depending on how she was looking at you. Today she was looking at Amelia the way a jeweler looks at a stone he suspects is glass. "A little," Amelia said. "Not intentionally. You should try to lose more." Victoria set her cup down with a precise click. For Nathaniel's sake, the air in the room shifted. Amelia put her own cup down. Slowly. "For Nathaniel's sake, I mean that image matters in his world." Victoria folded her hands in her lap. "It has always mattered, and a man in Nathaniel's position, his wife, is a reflection of him. Whether we like it or not, and you think I'm a bad reflection." Victoria didn't blink. "I think you are not what people expect." "What do people expect, Amelia?" Victoria's voice was patient, the way a surgeon's voice is patient just before a difficult cut. "You are a lovely person." I have always thought so. But my son is one of the most visible businessmen in this country now. The people he works with, the investors, the press, they notice everything. And they have noticed that you don't accompany him to events. He doesn't invite me. Victoria's expression didn't change. Yes, she said, I know was all, just those 2 words. And in them was everything Amelia had not wanted to see. You know, Amelia said, you've always known. I know my son, Victoria said quietly. And you agree with him. Victoria lifted her cup again. I think, she said carefully, that you love each other. But love is not always enough to make something work. Sometimes love needs assistance. You're telling me to lose weight, Amelia said. You're sitting here telling me that if I lose weight, my husband won't be ashamed of me. Victoria set her cup down again. I'm telling you that the world is not fair, and that you have been waiting for Nathaniel to choose you over the world, and I am telling you as his mother that he is not going to do that. Not yet, maybe not ever. She paused. I thought it was kinder to tell you directly. Amelia stood up. Her hands were completely steady. She noticed that. She thought it was remarkable how steady her hands were when everything inside her was breaking. Thank you for the tea, she said. She walked out. She didn't cry until she was in the elevator. She confronted Nathaniel that night. She had spent the entire cab ride home deciding exactly what she was going to say. She had organized the words carefully, like furniture in a room where each piece would go, how the room would look when she was done. But when she walked in and found him sitting on the couch with his laptop, looking up at her with that familiar, careful expression, all the furniture scattered. Am I an embarrassment to you? She asked. He didn't answer immediately. That was her first answer. Amelia, please don't say my name like that. Like you're trying to calm down someone who's being irrational. She sat across from him. She needed to be sitting. I need you to tell me the truth. Am I the reason you don't bring me to events? He closed his laptop. He put it on the cushion beside him. He pressed his hands together between his knees and stared at them for a long moment. And then he said, It's complicated. It's not complicated, she said. It's a yes or a no. The business world.
Yes or no?
Nathaniel. He looked up at her. His eyes were anguished. She would hold on to that later, the anguish in his eyes, as evidence that some part of him understood what he was doing. There are people, he said slowly, who make judgments, who look at a couple and they make decisions about credibility, about whether your wife is thin enough, Amelia said. That's exactly what you're saying. I'm saying that the business environment I operate in has made you ashamed of me. The word landed in the room like something dropped from a great height. Nathaniel flinched. I am not ashamed of you. Then why? She said. Her voice very quiet now, very careful. Did you tell your friend Marcus on the phone last month that you were alone? He went still. I was in the kitchen, she said. I heard you. The silence that followed was the loudest thing Amelia had ever experienced in her life. Amelia, he said finally. Don't, she stood, don't explain it. Don't make it into something that makes sense. It doesn't make sense. She pressed her hand against her sternum, against the place where the pain was sharpest. I was there. Nathaniel. I was there before the money, before the magazine covers, before Carter Global was anything. I sat on that kitchen floor with you when you thought everything was over. I drove you to the hospital at 3 a.m. I gave you 4 years of my life before you, even before you could afford to take me out to dinner. Her voice broke just once and she pulled it back together. And now you can afford everything. And I'm not someone you can afford to be seen with. He was standing now too. That is not your silence, she said. Every time I asked you why I wasn't invited, why I should stay home, why I should wait in the car, your silence was an answer. I just didn't want to hear it. Amelia, please listen to me. I have been listening to you for 11 years. She was not crying. She was surprised she was not crying. I have been listening and rearranging what I heard so it could be bearable. I'm done rearranging. She expected him to fight for her. Every cell in her body expected it. Even after everything, after the photograph, after Victoria's tea, after the phone call, she wasn't supposed to hear some stubborn, irreducible part of her expected Nathaniel Carter to finally stand up and choose her. He sat back down on the couch. He put his face in his hands, and after a very long moment, he said, I don't know how to fix this. I didn't ask you to fix anything, she said. I asked you whether you're ashamed of me. He didn't answer. The silence was her answer. She went to the bedroom and she started packing a bag. Not everything, just what she needed for a few days. She was not ready to think about everything yet. She was only ready to think about tonight, and tonight she needed to not be in this apartment. She heard him come to the doorway. Where are you going? To stay with my sister. She didn't look up from the bag. Amelia, let's talk about this. I think we just did. You're angry. I understand that, but leaving isn't. She looked up at him then. And whatever he saw in her face made him stop talking. I'm not leaving because I'm angry, she said. I'm leaving because I just understood something I should have done a long time ago. She zipped the bag. You love me, Nathaniel. I actually believe that. But loving someone and being willing to stand beside them, those are two different things. And for 3 years, maybe longer, you've been choosing not to stand beside me. That's not fair. I know it's not fair. She picked up the bag. That's the point. She walked past him. He reached out and caught her hand, just caught it. Didn't grip it, just the lightest possible pressure, and she stopped. Amelia, his voice was rough. Please, she looked at their hands. His fingers around her wrist. She thought about the Brooklyn apartment, the spreadsheets on the floor, the ring he'd saved up for. She removed her hand gently. I'll call you, she said. And she walked to the elevator, and she pressed the button, and she stood there watching the numbers count down while she breathed very carefully through her nose. And she did not look back. She did not look back. What happened next would change every understanding Amelia Carter had of herself. Not immediately. Immediately it was just pain. Her sister Sophie lived in a one-bedroom apartment in Hoboken, and she made up the couch with extra blankets and didn't ask too many questions. Which was exactly right. Sophie had always been exactly right. She brought Amelia a cup of tea and sat beside her on the couch in the dark and said, Do you want to talk? Not yet, Amelia said. Okay, said Sophie. And that was all. Amelia lay on that couch that night and stared at the ceiling and did the thing she had been refusing to do for years. She let herself feel all of it. The charity dinner where she'd sat home and watched the photographs appear online. The investor gala where Nathaniel told her the dress code was business casual, and she'd found out later it was black tie. The press conference for Carter Global's IPO, the biggest moment of his professional life, where she had watched from the televisions in the lobby, because he'd told her the room would be too crowded. She had made excuses for every single one of them. She had been so committed to her excuses that she had practically built a house out of them. She'd lived in that house for years. It had been drafty and uncomfortable, and she had told herself that drafts were normal, that everyone's house had drafts, that the cold was just the price you paid for love. But lying on her sister's couch at 2 a.m, she understood something for the first time. She had not been protecting her marriage. She had been protecting the story she told her about her marriage. And the story was not true. The truth was this: the man she had loved and believed in and fought for, the man she had held together on kitchen floors and in hospital rooms, had looked at her, looked at who she was and what she looked like and what she weighed, and decided she was a problem to be managed rather than a woman to be proud of. He had hidden her. For years he had hidden her, and she had let him. She pressed her hand over her mouth. She lay there on the couch in the dark, and she let the grief come. Not crying, something deeper than crying. A kind of reckoning. The slow, terrible process of removing every excuse she had made and seeing what had actually been there underneath all along. It took most of the night. By the time the first gray light came through Sophie's kitchen window, Amelia Carter was finished grieving the marriage she had believed she had. She was ready to grieve the one she'd actually lived in. And then much later, when the sun was fully up and Sophie had made coffee and was sitting across from her at the small kitchen table, she was ready to start thinking about what came next. I need to figure out what I want my life to look like, she said. Sophie wrapped her hands around her own mug. What does it look like right now? Amelia thought about it seriously. Like someone else's, she said. Sophie nodded. She didn't say anything. She waited. I want it to look like mine, Amelia said. And it was the first time in years that she had said something and felt completely, utterly certain that it was true. The divorce papers arrived 3 weeks later. Nathaniel had hired the best firm in the city, of course he had. And the settlement was generous, more than generous. The kind of settlement a man writes when he knows, somewhere in the part of himself he doesn't like to visit, that he has done something he cannot argue his way out of. Amelia sat at Sophie's kitchen table with papers spread out, a sister beside her and her sister Bagze, on video calls, and she read every word. It was generous. She thought about what it would mean to take the money, to walk away with enough to live comfortably for the rest of her life, to never have to prove anything to anyone. Then she thought about Victoria sitting across from her at that lacquered table with her Earl Grey tea, saying, I thought it was kinder to tell you directly. She thought about Nathaniel's face when she'd said the word ashamed. The flinch. The silence. She picked up her pen. She signed where she was supposed to sign. And then she said to the lawyer on the screen, I'm declining the settlement. I'll take what the court determines is equitable for my years of contribution to the household and his career. No more. Sophie grabbed her arm. Amelia, I don't want his guilt money, she said quietly. I want what I earned, and then I want to go earn the rest myself. The lawyer stared at her for a long moment. That's going to be significantly less than what he's offering. I know, said Amelia. Are you certain? She looked out the window at the gray Hoboken morning. At the ordinary, unhideable world. Yes, she said. I'm certain. She had never been more certain of anything in her life. She was 37 years old and she was starting over. She had a modest settlement, a small rented apartment in Brooklyn, just a few miles from the accounting office where she'd first met Nathaniel, which she thought was either poetic or ironic, and hadn't decided which. A degree in business administration she'd gotten before the marriage and barely used, and a sister who called every day. She also had something she had never quite appreciated before. She had herself, all of herself, not the edited, accommodating background version of herself she'd been performing for years in Nathaniel's world. The full version, the one that had opinions and appetite and took up space without apologizing for it. She started cooking real meals again. She started walking in the mornings, not because she wanted to lose weight, she had tried that before, for the wrong reasons, and it had felt like punishment, but because she liked the way the city looked at 7 in the morning, quiet and blue before it remembered to be frantic. She started reading again, business journals, market reports, case studies of companies that had scaled from nothing. She'd always been interested in this, as it was how she'd understood Nathaniel's pitch deck all those years ago, why she'd been the only one who told him his idea was actually good. She had a good mind, she'd always had a good mind. She'd just been putting it in service of someone else's vision. It was time to have her own. She was sitting in a coffee shop in Carroll Gardens, 6 weeks after the divorce was finalized, reading a feature in Forbes about the rapid growth of the wellness industry, when someone sat down across from her without being invited. Sorry to interrupt, said the woman, but I've been watching you read for 20 minutes, and I've never seen anyone look that focused in a coffee shop. What is it you're reading? Amelia looked up. The woman across from her was in her mid-50s, with close-cropped natural hair and the kind of composed, unhurried confidence that Amelia had learned to distinguish from arrogance. This was not arrogance. This was someone who had been certain of herself for a very long time and had stopped needing to prove it. A Forbes feature on wellness market projections, Amelia said. The woman's eyebrow went up. And they're underestimating the plus-size segment by about 40%. Amelia turned the magazine around so the other woman could see the graphs. They're looking at the mass market. But the real growth is in the premium segment, women who have purchasing power and have historically been told that luxury wellness isn't for them. It's an almost entirely untapped market. The woman's studied the page. Then she looked at Amelia. What's your background? Business administration. And 11 years managing the household finances of a billionaire. The woman smiled. Which billionaire? Amelia hesitated for exactly one beat. Then she said, Nathaniel Carter, a flicker of recognition. The woman sat back in her chair. I'm Evelyn Harrington, she said. I run Harrington International. Amelia had read about Evelyn Harrington. Everyone who followed the business world had read about Evelyn Harrington. She was one of the 20 most powerful women in American business and was known for building companies that other people said couldn't work. I know who you are, Amelia said. Good. Evelyn laced her fingers on the table. Then you know I don't sit down next to people in coffee shops unless I'm interested. And I am interested. She paused. How serious are you about the plus-size wellness market? Amelia looked at her. At this woman who had sat down across from her without being invited, who was looking at her, just looking at her, without the flicker of assessment, without the quick recalibration the way people look at someone they find genuinely interesting. Serious enough, Amelia said, given the right opportunity. Evelyn reached into her bag and put a business card on the table between them. Come to my office next week, she said. Come ready to pitch. Amelia picked up the card. She held it in both hands, and for the first time in years, maybe the first time since she was 26 years old, sitting across a desk from a nervous man with a cracked laptop, telling him his idea was actually good, she felt it. The particular electricity of a beginning. I'll be there, she said. The business card from Evelyn Harrington sat on Amelia's kitchen counter for 3 days before she touched it again. Not because she wasn't interested. She was interested in a way that felt almost dangerous, the way you feel when something real is finally within reach after years of reaching for things that turned out to be reflections. She was interested the way she hadn't been interested anything since she was 26 years old, and full of plans that hadn't yet been canceled by someone else's shame. She didn't touch the card because she was afraid. She sat across from it every morning with her coffee, and she looked at it and she thought about all the ways it could go wrong. She thought about what it meant to walk into Evelyn Harrington's office and pitch an idea to one of the most formidable businesswomen in America. She thought about what it meant to fail. And she thought about something else, something quieter and more corrosive. The voice that had been living inside her head for so long she'd started to mistake it for her own thoughts. The voice said, "Who do you think you are?" It sounded, she realized, exactly like Nathaniel's silence. On the fourth morning, she picked up the card, put it in her coat pocket, and called the number. The assistant who answered was brisk and professional and told her Evelyn had an opening on Thursday at 9 in the morning. Amelia said Thursday was perfect. She hung up the phone and stood in her small Brooklyn kitchen and pressed both hands flat on the counter and breathed. Then she opened her laptop and started working. She worked for 4 days straight. She pulled every market report she could find on the wellness industry. She built financial projections from scratch, the way she used to build them for Nathaniel's pitch decks, except this time the numbers were for something she actually believed in. She researched competitors, she mapped supply chains. She called Sophie at 11 o'clock at night and talked through her pricing model while Sophie sat on her couch in Hoboken and ate cereal and asked questions that were surprisingly sharp. "You've been thinking about this for a long time," Sophie said. "Haven't you?" Amelia paused. "I didn't know I was thinking about it." "You were," Sophie said. "You just didn't have anywhere to put it." Amelia looked at the spreadsheet on her screen, the numbers she'd built from nothing in 4 days, the market analysis that felt more alive to her than anything she'd touched in years. "I had somewhere to put it," she said quietly. "I was just putting it into someone else's company." Sophie was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Go get your own." Amelia closed her laptop at 2 in the morning. She set her alarm for 6, and for the first time since she'd slept on Sophie's couch and stared at the ceiling in the dark, she fell asleep quickly and without difficulty, the way people sleep when they have something real to wake up for. Thursday came. She wore a charcoal blazer she'd bought herself 3 weeks after the divorce, the first piece of clothing she'd chosen without thinking about whether Nathaniel would approve of it. It fit her exactly right. She walked into the Harrington International building on 5th Avenue with her portfolio under her arm and her heart beating fast and her chin level. The receptionist directed her to the 38th floor. She rode the elevator up and thought about the first time she'd ridden an elevator in a building like this one. Years ago, going up to a meeting with Nathaniel's first major investor. She'd stood beside him in that elevator and squeezed his hand and told him he was going to be extraordinary. She hadn't been wrong. She'd just forgotten to say the same thing to herself. The elevator doors opened. She walked out. Evelyn Harrington was already standing in the hallway, which Amelia had not expected. "You're early," Evelyn said. "I'm always early," Amelia said. "It's a habit, good habit." Evelyn turned and walked toward her office. "Come on." The meeting lasted 2 hours and 17 minutes. Amelia pitched for 45 minutes straight without notes. She'd memorized everything because she'd built everything, and because the thing she was describing wasn't just a business plan anymore. It was a vision she could see so clearly it almost hurt. Premium wellness for women who had spent their entire lives being told that luxury wasn't designed for their bodies. Skincare formulated without the assumption of a particular size. Fitness content that treated movement as pleasure rather than punishment. A membership community built around the radical idea that a woman at any size was worth investing in. She talked about market data. She talked about the 40% gap she'd identified in the Forbes projections. She talked about supply chain and distribution and brand positioning and the specific emotional architecture of marketing to a demographic that had been conditioned to believe it wasn't worth marketing to. She talked about herself once, just once. She said, "I know this customer personally. I know what it feels like to be in a room and have every product, every advertisement, every message in the culture tell you that you are not quite the right shape for the life you want. I know the exhaustion of that, and I know what it's worth when someone finally tells you otherwise." Evelyn watched her for all 2 hours and 17 minutes without once looking at her phone. When Amelia finished, the room was quiet. Then Evelyn leaned forward and said, "How much do you need to get to a prototype?" Amelia's heart has slammed once, hard against her ribs. She kept her face composed. "For a 6-month runway and a proof of concept." 400,000. Evelyn picked up her pen. "And in exchange, 15% equity. Harrington International takes a board seat. I retain operational control." Evelyn wrote something on her notepad. She didn't look up, you know. Most first-time founders come in here asking for guidance. Mentorship, a friendly ear. I don't need a friendly ear, Amelia said. I need a partner who understands value. Now Evelyn looked up, and she was smiling, the kind of smile that is rare and real and not performed for anyone's benefit. The 15% is too high, she said. I'll take 12. But I want monthly reporting and direct access to the product development team. Amelia's hands were completely still on the table. Deal, she said. They shook hands. Amelia walked back out through the Harrington International lobby and through the Glaspatast Avenue and into the cold October air, and then she stood on the sidewalk in the middle of the foot traffic with her portfolio under her arm, and she laughed. Not the polite, contained laugh she'd been practicing for years at business dinners where the joke wasn't funny, but the room expected you to smile. A real laugh surprised out of her, the way Nathaniel used to laugh in the early days when something genuinely caught him off guard. She thought about that for just 1 second. Then she took out her phone and called Sophie. I got the funding, she said when Sophie answered. The sound Sophie made in response was not a word, it was just a sound, raw and joyful, and Amelia stood on Fifth Avenue and held the phone against her ear and let it wash over her. I got the funding, she said again, because it was true and she needed to hear herself say it twice to believe it. 6 months later, the proof of concept was done. A year after that, the first product line launched. 18 months after that, a profile in Inc. magazine called Amelia Carter, founder of Whitmore Wellness, one of the most quietly disruptive voices in the American wellness industry. The journalist had asked her, during the interview, who had inspired her to start the company. Amelia had thought about that question for a long moment before she answered. Honestly, she said, someone who underestimated me. I've found that's the most reliable source of motivation I've ever encountered. The journalist had laughed. She'd printed it. It became the most shared line from the piece. Nathaniel saw it. She found out from Sophie, who had seen a mutual friend mention it, who had heard from someone at Carter Global that Nathaniel had read the Inc. piece 3 times and hadn't said a word about it to anyone in his office for the rest of that day. Amelia filed that information away somewhere quiet and kept working. Because the work was what mattered now, not what Nathaniel thought. Not what Victoria thought, not what anyone who had ever looked at her body and made a decision about her value thought. The work was real and it was hers, and every morning she woke up to it felt like a small, clean miracle, but the world, as Amelia had learned, did not allow people to grow in peace. 14 months after the Inc. profile, on a Tuesday morning in March, she was sitting in her office on the 3rd floor of the Whitmore Wellness headquarters, which occupied a converted warehouse in Williamsburg that she'd chosen specifically because the ceilings were high and the windows were large and the whole space felt like breathing, when her assistant Maya knocked on the open door with an expression that Amelia had learned to read accurately. That expression meant something had happened. There's a story, Maya said. It just went up on the business desk of the Post. Amelia set down her pen. What story? Maya came in and set her phone on the desk face up, and Amelia read the headline, and the room went very quiet inside her. Carter Global in Crisis, Insider reveals years of financial mismanagement. She read the article. Slowly, carefully, the way she read everything, it was detailed. It cited sources close to the board. It described a pattern of decisions that had been deteriorating for years, investments that had been poorly structured, key personnel who had quietly left the company, a decline in quarterly earnings that the PR machine had been smoothing over for longer than anyone outside the company had understood. It painted a picture of a billionaire who had spent years believing his own mythology and stopped listening to the people around him who were trying to tell him the truth. Amelia put the phone down. She thought about Nathaniel at 26, with the cracked laptop and the $12,000 and the foot tapping under the desk. She thought about the man who had sat on a kitchen floor, convinced everything was over and needed her to tell him it wasn't. She thought about the last thing she'd said to him before she left. You love me, Nathaniel, but loving someone and being willing to stand beside them, those are 2 different things. She felt something move through her that she couldn't quite name. It wasn't satisfaction, it wasn't grief. It was something more complicated than either. The particular ache of watching someone you once loved burn through the choices they made and arrive at the consequences. Do you want me to do anything with this? Maya asked. No, Amelia said. She picked up her pen again. We have a board meeting in an hour. Let's focus on that. Maya nodded and left. Amelia sat alone in her office for a moment and looked at the wall across from her desk where she had hung. Early on, in the first week they'd moved into the space, as a single framed print with 4 words on it, build something that lasts. She'd chosen those words carefully. She'd thought about what they meant in a context larger than business. She'd thought about what it meant to build a life that held together, even when the things around it fell apart. She had been building. Now she needed to see how much it had held. She closed the article on her phone. She opened her agenda for the board meeting. And she got back to work. What she did not know yet, on that Tuesday morning in March, was that the Carter global crisis was not just going to be a story in the Post. It was going to grow. It was going to become one of the most discussed corporate collapses in New York business news that year. And it was going to culminate in something that no one who had watched Amelia walk out of a ballroom in a black car, invisible and unnamed, could possibly have predicted. It was going to bring her back into the same room as Nathaniel Carter. Not as his wife, not as the woman he'd hidden, but as the person who held his future in her hands. She didn't know that yet. On that Tuesday morning, she was just a woman who had built something real, from the ruins of something broken. Sitting in an office she had chosen herself, in clothes that fit her exactly right, doing work she believed in, which was, she had come to understand, the most powerful position she had ever been in. The board meeting that afternoon went well. Harrington International's quarterly numbers were strong. The product expansion into 3 new markets was ahead of schedule. The membership community had grown to 87,000 women in 18 months. Women who wrote to Whitmore Wellness every day with messages that Amelia still read personally, every single one, because she had promised herself she always would. The messages said things like, "I thought luxury wasn't for me. I thought being comfortable in my own skin was something I had to earn. You made me feel like I was already worth it." Amelia kept every message in a folder on her laptop. On the days when doubt crept in, on the days when the old voice tried to reassert itself, the one that sounded like silence and smelled like a ballroom she was never allowed to enter. She opened that folder and she read. It always worked. After the board meeting, she walked home through Brooklyn, the long way through the streets she had walked every morning for the last 3 years. The city was loud and specific and completely indifferent to her in the most liberating way. Nobody on these streets knew who she was. Nobody was evaluating her against an image. She was just a woman walking home through Brooklyn in a charcoal blazer, and that was enough. That had turned out to be more than enough. That had turned out to be everything. Her phone buzzed. She looked at the screen. The number was one she hadn't called in 3 years. One she hadn't deleted, which she'd thought about and decided was not weakness but just honesty. Some numbers you didn't delete. Some people you didn't erase from the architecture of your history, because erasing them would mean pretending the years hadn't happened. And the years had happened, and she had decided to be a person who looked at what had actually happened, rather than the version she could have made more comfortable. Nathaniel's name. She stopped walking. She stood Zatzelwalk while people moved around her on both sides. And she looked at his name on her screen. She let it ring. It rang 6 times. It went to voicemail. She put her phone back in her pocket and stood there for a moment. She noticed that her hands were steady. She noticed that she was breathing normally. She noticed that the feelings that came up when she saw his name were complicated and real and present, but they were not the feelings of a woman who was going to be pulled backward. She started walking again. Her phone buzzed a second time. A text message from his number. She didn't open it until she was home, with her coat off and a glass of water in her hand, standing in the kitchen of the apartment that was hers, completely and only hers, that had her books on the shelves and her plants on the windowsill, and her mess on the counter exactly where she'd left it, because there was no one to manage her image anymore, no one to curate the appearance of her life for an audience. She opened the text. It said, "I need to talk to you. Not about the past, about business. I know that's not fair. I know you don't owe me anything, but it's important. Please." She read it twice. Then she set the phone face down on the counter. She filled a pot with water and put it on the stove and started making dinner, moving around her kitchen with the quiet efficiency of a woman who had learned that the most revolutionary thing she could do was take up space without apologizing for it. She did not text back that night. She did not text back the next morning either. She waited. Not because she was playing a game. She had never been interested in games. She waited because she was not sure yet what she wanted to say, and she had made a promise to herself 3 years ago. Standing on a sidewalk outside a divorce lawyer's office, with the wind coming off the East River and the whole city spread out around her like an argument she was finally ready to have, that she would never again speak before she was ready, just to fill someone else's silence. She had lived in his silence long enough. Now she set the terms. On the 3rd day, she called him back. He answered on the first ring. Amelia. His voice was different. She noticed it immediately. The particular quality of a voice when something has been pressed out of it. when the confidence or the control or the performance has been removed, and what's left is just the actual person underneath. "Nathaniel," she said, a pause. "Short but there. Thank you for calling back," he said. "I wasn't sure you would. I almost didn't." She sat down at her kitchen table. She had her notepad in front of her and her pen in her hand, because she had learned that taking notes in difficult conversations was not coldness. It was clarity, and she was a woman who valued clarity now above almost everything else. "You said it was about business." "It is." Another pause. "Carter Global is in trouble. I think you've seen the coverage." "I've seen it. It's worse than what's been reported." His voice was steady, but she could hear the effort it cost. "The board is meeting next week to discuss the future of the company. There are several investors who are looking for a majority stake. One of them is Harrington International." She already knew this. She had known it for 11 days. Evelyn had mentioned it in passing at a dinner 2 weeks ago, casually, the way Evelyn mentioned most large financial maneuvers, as though the acquisition of a struggling billion-dollar company was the sort of thing you brought up between the appetizer and the main course. What Evelyn had not told her was that she intended to send Amelia as her representative. She'd found that out 4 days ago. "Evelyn is sending you," Nathaniel said. "Isn't she?" It wasn't a question. "Yes," Amelia said. The silence on the line was long and dense and full of things neither of them was saying. "Okay," he said finally, "I just wanted you to know. Before you walked into that room, I didn't want it to be a surprise." She thought about that. About the fact that he was calling to warn her, to give her preparation she hadn't asked for, to extend a courtesy she had never been extended when she was his wife. She thought about a lot of things in that moment, in the 3 seconds of silence before she spoke. "I appreciate that," she said. Her voice was even. "I'll see you at the meeting." She ended the call. She set her phone on the table. She picked up her pen. She opened her notepad to a clean page and she started writing, not about feeling, not about history, not about everything that lived in the space between her name and his, but about business, about Carter Global's debt structure, about the board composition, about what Harrington International wanted and what Whitmore Wellness needed, and what Amelia Carter, who had once waited in a black car in the dark, while her husband walked through doors she wasn't allowed to pass, was prepared to walk through now. She wrote for 2 hours. When she was done, she had a strategy. She closed the notepad. She made dinner. She called Sophie and talked for 40 minutes about something entirely unrelated to Nathaniel Carter, because that was the other thing she had learned. The people who love you deserve your full attention, not just the overflow from the parts of yourself you weren't giving to someone else. Sophie made her laugh 3 times. That was enough. That was more than enough. She slept well. 3 days before the board meeting, she received a letter. An actual letter, in an envelope, with handwriting she had not seen in 3 years, but recognized instantly the way you always recognize the handwriting of someone you loved in the specific and physical way. That means you learned their particularities the way you learn a geography. She opened it standing in her hallway. It was short. Less than a page. She read it in under a minute, then she read it again. It said, "I know you don't owe me anything. I know that whatever I felt, whatever I thought I was doing when I made the choices I made, none of it was fair to you, and none of it was something you deserved. I've spent 3 years understanding, slowly and badly, the difference between loving someone and being willing to stand beside them. You said that to me the night you left. I didn't understand it then. I do now. I'm not writing this to ask for anything. I'm writing because you walk into that board meeting on Thursday, and I need you to know, before you do, that whatever happens in there, I am already sorry. For all of it, for every dinner, every empty seat. Every time you asked me a question and I gave you a silence that you were too good to call a lie. I am sorry. You deserved better than what I gave you. You always did." She stood in her hallway and held the letter. She was 39 years old. She had built a company from a conversation in a coffee shop and a business plan written in 4 nights. She had 87,000 women who had found something in what she built that helped them take up space in a world that had been telling them to shrink. She had a sister who called every day and a board that believed in her and work that was hers in a way that nothing in the previous decade of her life had been. She held the letter for a long time. Then she walked to her desk and she put it in the drawer where she kept things she wasn't ready to decide about yet. She had a board meeting to prepare for. Everything else could wait. The morning of the Carter Global board meeting, Amelia woke up at 5:15 without an alarm. She lay still for exactly 60 seconds. She did this every morning, had done it since the first week in the Brooklyn apartment. This practice of lying still before the day started and letting herself feel whatever was actually there, without managing it, without adjusting it for anyone's comfort. She had learned that the feelings you ignored in the morning had a way of showing up uninvited in the afternoon. What was there this morning was not fear. It was something sharper and cleaner than fear. It was the feeling of a person who has been moving towards something for a long time and can finally see the shape of it clearly. She got up, she made coffee. She stood at her kitchen window with the mug in both hands and looked at the city coming awake in the early gray light, and she thought about the letter in her desk drawer, the one she had not responded to and was not going to respond to today, because today was not about the letter. Today was about Carter Global and what Harrington International needed and what Amelia was prepared to ask for. She had not told Evelyn about the letter. She had not told anyone about the letter. Some things were not for sharing. Some things you kept close because they were still doing their work inside you, and pulling them out into the air too early would stop that work before it was done. She dressed carefully, not the charcoal blazer this time. Today she wore a deep burgundy suit she had commissioned from a tailor in Midtown 8 months ago, a woman named Claudette who had made clothes for Amelia twice before and understood, without being told, that what Amelia needed was not clothing that minimized or apologized or tried to take up less room. She needed clothing that said exactly what she needed it to say before she opened her mouth. She stood in front of the mirror. She looked at herself for a long moment. Then she picked up her portfolio and walked out the door. The Carter Global headquarters occupied 6 floors of a glass tower in Midtown, and Amelia had been inside it exactly once before, years ago when the building was still new, and Nathaniel had wanted to show her the view from his office. She remembered standing at his floor-to-ceiling window and looking out at the city and feeling genuinely proud of him. Genuinely moved. This was what they had worked toward. This was what she had believed in when no one else had. She had never been back after that day. She stood in front of the building now and looked up at it without any of the feelings she would have predicted. She felt clear. She felt ready. She felt like a woman who had done the work and knew exactly what she was walking into. She went through the revolving doors. The lobby was the kind of lobby that had been designed to make a specific point. Everything in it communicated power in the particular language of people who had so much of it, they could afford to pretend they weren't trying. The receptionist looked up when Amelia approached the desk and did the thing receptionists in buildings like this sometimes did, that half-second assessment, the quick read of who someone was and whether they warranted the full-service smile. Amelia put her business card on the desk before the woman could speak. "Amelia Carter," she said, "Harrington International. I'm here for the board meeting." The half-second assessment resolved itself instantly. The full-service smile appeared. "Of course, Miss Carter. They're expecting you on the 41st floor. I'll let them know you've arrived." She rode the elevator up. 41 floors. She counted them the same way she had once counted the floors going down in Nathaniel's building, the night she left with her suitcase and her broken heart and her absolutely steady hands. She had come a long way from that elevator. The doors opened on 41. A young man in a gray suit was waiting for her. He introduced himself as James. He was Nathaniel's chief of staff, and his expression was calibrated to project professional neutrality. But she could see the slight strain in it, the effort of a person trying not to show that he was aware of the specific history attached to this particular visitor. "The board is assembled," James said, "if you'll follow me." She followed him down a corridor she didn't recognize, through a set of heavy double doors and into the Carter Global boardroom. She had prepared herself for this moment. She had run it in her head 100 times. She had thought about the specific geometry of it, the way the room would be arranged, where Nathaniel would be sitting, what his face would do when she walked in. She had prepared for all of it. She had not quite prepared for how it would feel. The room held 12 people, board members, legal representatives, financial advisors, 2 other investors besides herself. They were seated around a long table, and at the head of the table was Nathaniel Carter. He was 51 years old now. His hair had more silver in it. The lines of his face were deeper. He was still, objectively, handsome in the specific way of men who had been handsome young and had aged into something more serious. He was wearing a dark suit, and his hands were flat on the table in front of him, and he was looking at her with an expression that she had never seen on him before. It took her a moment to name it. It was awe, not the romantic kind. The kind that comes from looking at someone and understanding, fully and without any softening, exactly what you had and what you threw away. She held his gaze for exactly 2 seconds, professional, neutral. Then she looked at the rest of the room. "Good morning," she said. "Thank you for having me." She took her seat on the opposite side of the table. The meeting was called to order. Amelia had attended a lot of board meetings in 3 years. She had run most of her own. She had sat across tables from investors who doubted her, and board members who underestimated her, and advisors who addressed their comments to the person sitting next to her, instead of directly to her, which was a specific kind of dismissal she had learned to handle with a particular combination of patience and precision. This meeting was different from all of those, because in this meeting, every person in the room was acutely aware of two things: the financial crisis on the table and the specific identity of the woman representing Harrington International. She could feel it in the quality of the silence when people stopped talking. She could feel it in the way the legal team kept glancing between her and Nathaniel. She could feel it in Nathaniel himself, who was conducting the meeting with the controlled, effortful professionalism of a man doing something that was costing him an enormous amount. The first hour was procedural, financial presentations, quarterly reports, projections. Amelia listened to all of it and took notes and asked 3 questions, each one precise, each one landing in the room with the particular weight of a question that already knows its answer and is asking anyway for the record. The board members noticed. She could see them noticing. Then came the first real moment. Carter Global's CFO, a compact man named Richard Hale, who had been with the company for 9 years, presented the acquisition proposal from Harrington International. He presented it neutrally, professionally, without editorializing. But when he finished, the room was quiet in the way. Rooms get quiet when something has just been said that changes the shape of everything. The proposal gave Harrington International controlling interest in Carter Global in exchange for a restructuring package that would stabilize the company's debt and reposition it for growth over 5 years. It was financially an excellent deal. It was also, for Nathaniel Carter, the end of his reign over the company he had built. One of the board members, a man named Gerald Foster, who had been with Carter Global since the IPO, leaned forward. He was in his late 60s and had the manner of a man who had watched a lot of rooms and had opinions about all of them. "I want to understand," he said, looking directly at Amelia, "what Harrington International's long-term vision is for the Carter Global brand. Because what I'm not willing to do is sign over this company to become a subsidiary that gets absorbed and loses its identity." It was a fair question. It was also the way Gerald Foster phrased it, with that specific weight on the word subsidiary, pointed in a way that was not entirely about business. Amelia looked at Gerald Foster calmly. "Harrington International has no interest in absorption," she said. "Our model has always been autonomous growth under a shared capital structure. Carter Global would maintain its brand, its leadership team, and its operational identity. What changes is the financial architecture and the strategic oversight. What stays the same is the name on the door." Gerald Foster nodded slowly. He was not entirely satisfied, she could see that. But he was listening, and listening was enough for now. "And who provides the strategic oversight?" asked another board member, a woman named Diane Chen, who Amelia had researched and respected. "A joint board," Amelia said, 3 seats from Harrington, 3 retained seats from the current Carter Global board, and 1 independent chair agreed upon by both parties." "And where does that leave the current CEO?" Diane asked. The room went absolutely still. Amelia looked at the table for 1 measured breath. Then she looked at Nathaniel. He was already looking at her. He hadn't looked away since she'd walked through the door. "That," she said, "is a decision for the board to make based on the restructuring terms and the company's needs going forward. Harrington International doesn't dictate personnel decisions. We restructure financial architecture. People are not architecture." She heard what she had just said a beat after she said it. People are not architecture. She had not planned that line. It had come from somewhere true and unscripted, and she knew, from the quality of the silence that followed it, that everyone in the room had heard the extra weight in it. Not just the board members, Nathaniel. He closed his eyes for exactly 1 second. Then he opened them and said, in a voice that was completely, professionally controlled, "I'd like to call a 10-minute recess." The room stirred. People stood, stretched, moved toward the coffee station at the side of the room. Amelia stayed seated. She opened her portfolio and looked at her notes and did not look up, because she knew what was coming and she needed 1 more minute to be completely ready for it. She heard his footsteps before he spoke. She had always known his footsteps. He stopped beside her chair. He didn't sit down, he stood there, and she felt him standing there the way you feel heat from something that is close without touching. "You don't have to do this," he said quietly. She looked up. He was standing with his hands in his pockets and his shoulders carrying the particular weight of a man who had been carrying something heavy for a very long time, and was no longer sure he could hold it. "Do what?" she asked. "Be here," he paused. "Evelyn could have sent anyone. She sent me because I'm the right person for this negotiation. She sent you because she knew it needed to be you." His voice was low. The room was full of noise from the people at the coffee station, but it felt, in this particular radius, like they were the only two people in it. Evelyn doesn't do anything without a reason. Amelia considered that. It was true, Evelyn Harrington did not do anything without a reason. She had sent Amelia to this room deliberately, and there had been a conversation between them, brief and clear, in which Evelyn had said, "You can say no. I want you to know that. If it's too complicated, I'll send Marcus." And Amelia had said no, she would go, and Evelyn had nodded in that way. She had, like she'd expected that answer, but needed to offer the other option anyway. "I'm here because this is my job," Amelia said, "and because I'm good at it. That's all." Nathaniel looked at her for a long moment. "You look," he started. "Don't," she said, not unkindly. Just clearly he stopped. "Not today," she said. He nodded once. He straightened. He put his professional face back on, the one she had watched him construct over years, and she watched the personal moment close over like water over a stone. "Right," he said, "of course." He walked back to his seat. The recess ended. The meeting resumed. What happened over the next 3 hours was the most professionally rigorous thing Amelia had ever been part of. Every number was challenged, every projection was interrogated. Every clause in the acquisition proposal was examined from 6 different angles by people who were paid extraordinary amounts of money to find the weakness in a document before they agreed to be bound by it. Amelia held every challenge. She answered every question with the precision of someone who had built her answers on a foundation that did not have soft places in it. She had done the work. She had always done the work. That had not changed, it had just found a larger stage. But the second real moment, the one that shifted the room in a way that was not procedural, came from an unexpected direction. The investor on Amelia's left, a man named Thomas Wren, who represented a private equity fund that had been considering its own competing bid for Carter Global, leaned back in his chair at the 2-hour mark and said, with the particular casualness of a man who is not being casual, "I want to go back to the question of operational leadership. Because my concern, and I'm going to be direct about this, my concern is the optics of this deal. Harrington International is a sound partner financially. But the face of this negotiation is," he paused, and in that pause was a category of dismissal that Amelia had encountered before, in rooms that were smaller than this one, with stakes that were lower, from people who were less carefully dressed, not someone with a conventional background in corporate restructuring. The room went quiet in a different way. Amelia set her pen down. She looked at Thomas Wren with the patience of a woman who had been underestimated by its experts and had long since stopped being surprised by it. "My background," she said, "includes building a company from a $400,000 seed investment to a valuation of $230 million in 4 years. It includes 3 successful market expansions, an 87,000-member consumer community with a 92% retention rate, and a supply chain restructure that reduced operational costs by 31% in year 2. She paused. "If that's unconventional, I'm comfortable with unconventional." Thomas Wren opened his mouth. "I'm not finished," Amelia said. He closed it. Carter Global's current situation is the result of conventional thinking applied by conventional people who were more invested in protecting an image than building something sustainable. She held Thomas Wren's gaze without any aggression in it, just the flat, clear weight of someone stating a fact. "Harrington International is offering this board a path forward. What you do with that offer is your decision. But I'd recommend basing it on the numbers rather than the optics." The silence that followed was the kind that has a texture to it. Diane Chen, across the table, was writing something on her notepad. Gerald Foster was looking at Amelia with an expression that had shifted measurably in the last 3 hours. James, the chief of staff, standing near the door, was very carefully not reacting. And Nathaniel was looking at her with the same expression he had worn when she walked in. Away, and something else now, something that she recognized because she had watched him feel it years ago, in a different context, in a smaller room, when he had finally understood that his pitch was good and someone was actually going to believe in him. He was watching her the way she had once watched him, like he was seeing, for the first time, the full size of what was in front of him. Like he was understanding what he had let go of. The vote came at 4:17 in the afternoon. The board voted 9-3 in favor of the Harrington International acquisition proposal. It was done. Gerald Foster moved immediately to the question of CEO succession. He was precise about it, clinical even, and Amelia respected that. This was not a moment for softness. This was a company's future being decided, and sentiment had no place in it. Under the terms of the acquisition, Gerald said, the restructuring committee will conduct a 60-day review of senior leadership. The current CEO position will be evaluated as part of that review. Nathaniel said nothing. His face gave nothing, but his hands, flat on the table in front of him, pressed down slightly, and Amelia, who had learned his body the way you learn a language you've spoken every day for 11 years, saw it. The meeting was adjourned. People began gathering their things. The room shifted into the particular controlled chaos of a large group of people recalibrating after something significant. Amelia closed her portfolio. She put her pen in her jacket pocket. She accepted a handshake from Diane Chen and exchanged cards with Gerald Foster, who told her he looked forward to working with her, and who said it like he meant it. She was almost at the door when she heard his voice. Amelia, she turned around. The room was mostly empty now. Just the two of them and James near the door, who looked at Nathaniel, received some signal she couldn't see, and quietly stepped out. Nathaniel was standing at the head of the now empty table. He looked, she thought, like a man at the end of something. Not defeated. Something more complicated than defeated. Something more honest that was started. He stopped. He tried again. What you did in this room today was my job, she said. Was extraordinary, he said. She didn't answer. I've been in a lot of boardrooms, he said, with a lot of very smart, very formidable people. And I've watched you he gestured at the empty table. The empty chairs dismantle 3 years of bad decisions in one afternoon. With your eyes open and your voice steady, and his voice broke slightly on the next word, and she heard it happen. No resentment. None. You were fair to me. You were fair to this company. You didn't have to be. I know I didn't have to be, she said. Then why? She thought about it seriously. She always thought seriously about questions that deserved serious answers. Because being fair is not something I do for other people, she said. It's something I do because of who I am. You don't get to take that from me. She paused. You took a lot of things. You didn't take that. He absorbed that. She watched him absorb it, the way you watch someone drink something that is both necessary and painful. The letter, he said. Did you read it? Yes, I meant every word. I know you did. She picked up her portfolio. And I'm still deciding what I think about that. But since deciding it today, he nodded. His jaw was tight. She could see the effort it took him to hold himself still and not reach for something more. Not ask for more than she was offering, which was nothing yet. Which was just the fact that she was still in the room. Are you? He stopped. Are you okay? He asked finally. Not today. Are you okay? It was such a simple question. Such an unexpectedly human question, stripped of business and history and the weight of everything that had happened between them. Just a man asking a woman he had once loved whether she was okay. She looked at him for a long moment. Yes, she said. And she meant it completely. I'm really okay. He let out a breath. Like he'd been holding it since the meeting started. Like maybe he'd been holding it for 3 years. Good, he said quietly. That's good. She walked out of the boardroom. James was waiting in the hallway. He offered to see her down. She said that was all right. She knew the way. She walked back down the corridor she had followed in, back to the elevator bank, back to the lobby with its deliberately powerful silence. The revolving doors let her out onto the sidewalk. The city hit her all at once, the way it always did after a long stretch of indoor air and indoor steaks and indoor everything. The noise and the movement and the particular smell of a Manhattan afternoon. Exhaust and food and cold air coming off the Hudson from somewhere to the west. She stood on the sidewalk for a moment. Her phone buzzed. Evelyn, she picked up immediately. Well, Evelyn said. 9 to 3, Amelia said, a pause. Then how did he look? Amelia thought about his hands flat on the table. About his eyes when she'd walked in. About the way his voice had broken slightly on the word resentment. Like someone who finally understood something, she said. Evelyn was quiet for a moment. And how do you feel? Amelia started walking. She walked the way she walked every morning, with her shoulders back and her head up and her coat open, because she had stopped shrinking into clothing years ago, stopped making herself smaller to take up less of any space she occupied. Like myself, she said. I feel exactly like myself. Good, said Evelyn. That's all I needed to know. I'll see you Thursday. She ended the call and kept walking. 15 blocks later, her phone buzzed again. She looked at the screen. A text from a number she didn't recognize. She almost didn't open it. But something made her. It was from Victoria Carter. It said, I heard the vote. You were always remarkable. Amelia, I was too proud and too frightened to say so when it would have mattered. I don't ask for your forgiveness. I only want you to know that I was wrong. Amelia stopped walking. She stood on the sidewalk and read the message twice. She thought about a lacquered table and Earl Grey tea and a voice saying, "I thought it was kinder to tell you directly." She thought about what it cost a woman like Victoria Carter to send a message like that. She thought about what it cost anyone to admit they'd been wrong in a way that had done real damage. She typed back 2 words, "Thank you." She sent it. She put her phone in her pocket. She walked the remaining 6 blocks to the subway station. She went down the stairs. She got on the train. She sat in a seat between a woman with a sleeping baby and a teenager with enormous headphones, and she held her portfolio on her lap and she looked at her own reflection in the dark window across from her. She thought about the girl who had waited in a black car in a ballroom parking lot, wearing a carefully pressed dress, watching through tinted glass as the door closed between her and the life she thought she had. She thought about the woman sitting on this subway car in Burgundy, with a board vote in her portfolio and a company of her own and estisas 1,000 women who had found something in what she built that helped them stand up straighter in a world that spent a lot of energy telling them to sit down. She thought about what connected those 2 women, the thread that ran from that parking lot to this subway car, the thing that had not been taken from her even when so much else had been. She had never stopped believing in herself even when she had stopped showing it. Even in the years of quiet accommodation and careful silence and excuses constructed to make the cold feel warmer, there had been something underneath all of it that had not gone out. A pilot light, a stubborn, irreducible certainty that she was worth more than the space she was being given. She had just needed the room to prove it. The train pulled into her station. She stood up, she walked out. She climbed the stairs back into the Brooklyn air, into the neighborhood she had chosen for herself, into the evening that belonged entirely to her. She had a call with her product team in an hour. She had dinner with Sophie on Friday. She had a keynote to write for the Women's Entrepreneurship Conference next month, where she was the opening speaker, which still struck her as the kind of fact that required a moment of quiet before it could be fully taken in. She had a life, her own life, built by her own hands from the rubble of something that had tried to make her invisible. And she had walked today into the most significant boardroom of her career, into a room that held the man who had once told her she was nobody. And she had been so thoroughly, completely undeniably somebody that the room had voted 9-3. She walked into her building. She took off her coat. She put her portfolio on the table. She stood in her kitchen, in the apartment that was hers, in the evening light that came through her windows at this time of day, at this time of year, in exactly this specific and unrepeatable shade. And she felt something she had been feeling more and more often lately, something that she had not felt in the years of the marble penthouse and the empty chair beside him at charity dinners, something so simple it was almost embarrassing to name. She felt at home, not in a place in herself. That was the whole of it. She filled the kettle. She put it on. She waited for it to boil, the way you wait for things that are coming regardless, patient and present and completely solidly there. The 60-day restructuring review began on a Monday. Amelia knew because her calendar had it marked, the same way it had every significant date marked. With the same neutral precision she applied to product launches and board calls and quarterly reviews. She had learned early in her business life that the most dangerous thing you could do was let the emotional weight of an event bleed into the way you prepared for it. You prepared the same way regardless. You did the work. You showed up. You let the work speak. What she had not anticipated was how much the next 60 days would ask of her. Not professionally. Professionally, she was prepared for every moment of it. Evelyn had given her the lead role on the Carter Global restructuring, which meant Amelia was in that building 3 days a week. Minimum, sitting across tables from people who were still recalibrating to the reality of what had happened in that boardroom, still adjusting to the fact that the woman they were now answering to was someone who had once been kept out of this world entirely by the man at the top of it. She handled every room with the same composure she had brought to the board meeting. She did not make it personal. She did not bring the past into any professional conversation. She was clear, she was thorough, and she was faster than anyone expected, which was the thing that tended to change rooms most completely. That specific surprise people felt when someone they had underestimated turned out to operate at a speed that left no room for doubt. But outside the professional reality of the restructuring, the 60 days asked something different of her, because Nathaniel was still in the building. The restructuring review did not immediately remove him from his position. He retained the title of CEO during the review period, which was standard practice and which Amelia has expected and which she had prepared herself for. But preparation and reality were, she was finding, 2 different countries with the same name. She saw him in the elevator on the second week. It was a Thursday morning, 8:47. She knew the time because she had just checked her phone to confirm her 9 o'clock was still on. The doors opened on the lobby level and he was there, already inside, and they looked at each other for exactly the amount of time it takes a person to decide what to do with a moment they didn't see coming. "Good morning," he said. "Good morning," she said. She stepped in, the doors closed, 41 floors. They rode in silence for the first 10 floors, which was not uncomfortable exactly, but was the kind of charge that you feel in your chest, the particular density of 2 people who know too much about each other existing in a small space. Then he said, without looking at her, "How's Sophie?" She glanced at him. "She's well. She's in her 2nd year of her doctorate now." He nodded. She always was the smartest person in any room she walked into. Except when you were in the room, she didn't answer that. Not because it stung. Because it was true, and it landed in a complicated place, and she wasn't going to perform humility she didn't feel or warmth she hadn't decided to offer yet. The elevator opened on 41. She stepped out first. "Amelia," his voice stopped her. She turned. He was holding the elevator door, his hand on the frame, looking at her with something that she had been watching him carry since the day she walked into that boardroom, and that was getting heavier. She could see it getting heavier every time she encountered him, like a man walking a very long distance with something he should have put down years ago and couldn't figure out how to set on the ground without it breaking. "I'd like to have coffee," he said, "not a meeting. Not about the restructuring, just coffee. If you're willing." She looked at him. "I'll think about it," she said. She walked down the corridor to the conference room she was using. She did not look back, but she thought about it. She thought about it through her 9 o'clock, and through the financial review at 11, and through the working lunch with the Carter Global Operations team that went 40 minutes over schedule, because nobody had told the operations team that Amelia Carter did not accept vague answers to specific questions, and it took them 40 minutes to understand that. She thought about what coffee with Nathaniel Carter meant. Not the coffee itself, what it meant. Whether she was ready to sit across from him in a context that was not professional, a space that was not protected by the structure of a board meeting or the presence of other people or the clean lines of a business negotiation. Whether she was ready to be in a room with the personal version of him again. She thought about the letter in her desk drawer, the one she had not responded to. The one she had read 4 more times since the night she received it, late at night, not because she was reconsidering anything, but because she was still doing the work of understanding what she actually felt, and you couldn't do that work without looking at the thing directly. What she felt, she had determined, was not simple. She had loved Nathaniel Carter for a long time. That love had changed shape. It had been broken and grieved and examined and slowly, carefully transformed into something that no longer had the power to pull her backward. But the love itself had not entirely disappeared, the way the fact of a fire doesn't disappear just because the fire is out. The ash is still there. The heat that changed the shape of things is still visible in the shapes themselves. She was not in love with him, she knew that clearly. She was in love with her life in a way she had never been in love with anything. This life she had built with her own hands, this company and this work and this self that had been standing here all along, waiting for her to finally take up the space she was owed. But she was also a woman who had loved a man for 11 years and watched him choose fear over her, and that did not simply resolve. That required time and honesty, and the willingness to sit with complicated things rather than simplifying them into a more manageable story. She thought about all of this, and 2 days later, on a Saturday morning, she texted him. "Tomorrow, 10 o'clock. I'll pick the place." She chose a coffee shop in Carroll Gardens, the same neighborhood where she had met Evelyn. Different shop, but close enough that she could feel the geography of that moment, the specific coordinates of where she had started. As an anchor, she needed an anchor for this conversation. She needed to be able to feel, physically and clearly, who she was now, so that she could be that person in the room with him and not accidentally become the older version of herself, the one who had been so committed to accommodation that she had lost the thread of her own voice entirely. She arrived first. She ordered her coffee. She sat at a table near the window and looked at her phone and then put her phone in her bag because she was not going to use her phone as armor. She was going to sit at this table and be present and feel whatever she felt and say whatever she meant. He walked in at 10:02. He was not dressed for business. That was the first thing. He was wearing a coat she didn't recognize and dark jeans, and he looked, without the suit, without the context of the boardroom, More like the man she had met at 26 than the man she had watched become famous. He looked like someone who had been recently significantly reduced. Not in a cruel way, in the way of a person who has had some large, heavy constructed thing removed from them and is still adjusting to what it feels like to be smaller but more real. He saw her. He came to the table. He sat down. "Thank you for this," he said. "Don't thank me yet," she said. "I haven't decided what this is." He nodded. He understood that. She could see he understood it. The server came. He ordered black coffee. She wrapped both hands around her own mug. And for a moment they just sat there. Two people who had 11 years between them and 3 years of distance, and a board vote and a letter in a desk drawer, and an elevator ride and a very long silence that was finally, in this small coffee shop in Carroll Gardens on a Sunday morning, going to be broken. He spoke first. "I want to ask you something," he said. "And I want you to know before I ask it that there's no right answer. I'm not asking because I expect anything or because I think you owe me an honest response. I'm asking because I genuinely want to understand." She watched him. "Ask, when did you know?" he said. "When did you know that it wasn't going to be okay? Not the night you left. Before that, I mean, when did you first actually know?" She looked at her coffee. She thought about it seriously. She always thought seriously about questions that deserved serious answers. "The IPO," she said. "Your press conference, I watched it on the lobby television because you told me the room was too crowded." She paused. "I knew then, I just chose not to know for 2 more years." He closed his eyes. "I told myself," he said, when he opened them, "that I was protecting you. From the pressure, from the scrutiny. I told myself that so many times that I almost believed it. I know you did. But that's not." He stopped. He pressed his hands flat on the table, a gesture she recognized from the boardroom, something he did when he was trying to hold himself steady. "I was afraid," he said. "That's the real thing, not of what people would think. I mean, yes, that was part of it, but underneath that was something I've spent 3 years being honest with myself about." He looked at her directly. "I was afraid that if people saw you, they'd see me. The part of me that existed before all of this, the part that wasn't polished. That wasn't the image. You were the person who knew who I was before I became who I became. And somewhere along the way, I started to feel like being seen with you was being seen as that person. The person who was nobody." His voice was rough. "That's the truth. That's the ugly actual truth of it." The coffee shop was warm and quiet around them. The Sunday morning version of the city, slower and softer. Amelia looked at him for a long moment. "You were never nobody," she said. "You were 26 and scared and brilliant, and you had an idea that was actually good. That's not nobody. That's just somebody who hasn't been seen yet." He was quiet. "And I love that person," she said. "I want you to know that. I love that person completely. But the person who put me in a car and walked through a door and let it close between us, that person had decided that being seen was more important than seeing me. And I can't love someone who makes that choice. I don't have that in me anymore." His jaw moved. He looked down at the table. When he looked back up, there was something in his eyes that she had almost never seen in all the years she had known him. Something that men who have spent decades building armor rarely let through. He was genuinely undone. "I know," he said. "I'm not sitting here asking you to—" He stopped. "I'm not asking for anything back. Amelia, I know I don't get that. I understand why I don't get that, and I'm not going to pretend that understanding it yet doesn't hurt. Because it does. It's the thing that has hurt most consistently for 3 years." He paused. "But I'm not asking for it back. I'm asking—" He stopped again. He took a breath. "I'm asking if you're okay, genuinely. Not the professional answer. Not the Harrington International answer. The real one." She looked at him. "Yes," she said. And she said it the same way she had said it in the boardroom, with the same completeness, the same unambiguous truth of it. "I am genuinely completely okay. Better than okay. I built something I'm proud of. I wake up every morning to work that I love. I have my sister and I have people around me who see me clearly, who don't need me to be a different size or a different shape or a different person." She stopped and looked at the window, at the street outside, at the ordinary Sunday morning of it, and felt the full specific weight of what she was about to say. "I have myself. I finally have myself, and that's more than I've had in a long time." He nodded slowly. Like someone hearing a verdict they had known was coming, and still needed to hear spoken aloud. "Good," he said. His voice was barely above a conversation. "That's good. That's what I wanted. That's the thing I wanted to know." They sat in silence for a moment. Not a bad silence, not the charged silence of the elevator. Something quieter. The silence of two people who have finally said the true things and are resting in the aftermath. Then she asked the question she had been carrying since the day she saw his name on her phone screen. "What are you going to do?" she said, "about the company. About what comes next. Long and slow. The review is going to remove me. I know that. The numbers don't support keeping me on as CEO, and I'm not going to fight something I know is correct." He looked at his hands. "I had 9 years of running that company the way I wanted to run it. I made decisions that I thought were right, and some of them were right, and some of them were. I stopped listening. At some point, I stopped listening to the people around me because I had spent so long being the person with the right answers that I forgot how to be wrong." He paused. "That's what the company taught me. In the end, not how to win. How to handle being wrong. That's not nothing," she said. "No," he agreed, "it's not nothing." She looked at him. At 51, with the silver in his hair and the lines of his face, and the particular quality of a man who had been brought very low and was trying to decide what to do with the view from there. She felt something for him that she had not expected to feel in this coffee shop on this Sunday morning, something that was neither love nor anger nor satisfaction, something much quieter and more human. She felt compassion. Not the performed kind, not the kind you produce because it's appropriate. The real kind that comes from understanding that people contain their choices and their choices contain their damage, and sometimes the most honest thing you can do is see both clearly and refuse to reduce a person to only one of them. "You were extraordinary in a lot of ways," she said. "I want you to know that I know that, what you built, before the fear got bigger than the vision that was real. That mattered." He looked at her like she had said something that hurt and helped simultaneously. "Like a hand on a wound, I don't deserve that," he said. "I'm not giving it to you because you deserve it," she said. "I'm saying it because it's true, and I'm not in the business of lying to make things easier." A sound came out of him. Half laugh, half something that was not a laugh at all. "No," he said, "you never were." They finished their coffees. The Sunday morning moved around them, unhurried and unconcerned with their history. At some point, the server refilled her mug without being asked, and she wrapped her hands around the warmth of it and felt the ordinary, sustaining comfort of that small gesture. When they stood to leave, he held the door for her. She walked through it. They stood on the sidewalk for a moment. "Can I ask you something?" she said. "Anything," he said. "The woman in the red dress," she said it evenly, without heat. Just the fact of the question. "At the Harrington Foundation dinner." "The one in the photographs," he looked at her. She watched something move through his face. Not guilt or complex. "Nothing happened," he said. "I want you to know that. I don't know if it matters." "But it matters," she said. "Thank you for saying it." He nodded. "Was it lonely?" she asked, and she meant all of it. The whole architecture of the life he had built around the performance of who he was supposed to be. He was quiet for a moment. "Yes," he said, "very." She looked at him one more time. At the full, complicated, real person of him. "I hope it gets less lonely," she said. And she meant that too. She walked away. She walked the 6 blocks back to her apartment building and went in upstairs, and she took off her coat, and she stood in her kitchen, and she opened the desk drawer. She took out the letter. She read it one more time. The whole thing, his handwriting on the heavy cream paper, every word she had memorized by now. Then she folded it carefully. She put it back in the envelope. She put the envelope at the very back of the drawer. She closed the drawer. She was not going to throw it away. She had decided that. Some things you kept not because they were happy, but because they were true, because they were part of the geography of how you became the person you became, and erasing the geography didn't change the terrain. But she was done carrying it in the front of her mind. She had put it where it belonged in the past. 2 weeks later, the 60-day review concluded. The restructuring committee recommended the removal of Nathaniel Carter from the position of Chief Executive Officer of Carter Global Enterprises. The recommendation was adopted by the board on a Tuesday afternoon in a meeting that Amelia attended but did not lead, deliberately because there were moments that required her presence and moments that required her absence, and she had become very good at knowing the difference. She heard about the vote from Diane Chen, who called her afterward. It passed, Diane said, unanimously. A pause. He didn't fight it. Amelia thought about a man who had spent his whole career fighting, who had built an empire on the refusal to accept a loss, who had sat across from her in a coffee shop 2 weeks ago and said, "I'm not going to fight something I know is correct." No, she said, he wouldn't. 3 days after the vote, she received a call from James, the chief of staff. He told her that Nathaniel had cleared his office and was vacating the building at end of business Friday. He wanted to know if there was any protocol Amelia needed observed. No protocol, she said, just make sure he has what he needs. She was not in the building on Friday. She had her own office to be in, but at 4:57 that afternoon, As she was finishing a call with her product development team about the spring line, her phone buzzed with a text from a number she recognized. It said, "I cleared out. Thank you for how you handled all of this. You were more decent than I had any right to expect. Take care of the company. You're the right person for what comes next." She read it. She set the phone down. She finished her call. Then she sat in her office in the Williamsburg warehouse, with the high ceilings and the large windows and the particular late afternoon light coming through the glass. And she thought about what he had said, "You're the right person for what comes next." She thought about whether she believed that she did. She thought about how strange it was, the paths that led to a moment. All the specific choices and accidents and griefs and decisions that accumulated into the particular Tuesday afternoon where a woman sat in an office she had built and believed, without qualification or performance, that she was exactly where she was supposed to be. She thought about the black car, the ballroom door closing. "You're nobody." She thought about the couch in Sophie's apartment, about the business card from a coffee shop encounter, about $400,000 and a pitch she's built in 4 days and a handshake with a woman who saw her clearly from the very first moment. She thought about 87,000 women and a folder full of messages and a keynote she was giving in 3 weeks to an audience of 1,200 people. She thought about Nathaniel in a coffee shop saying the ugly actual truth. She thought about compassion, about how it was possible to understand a person's damage without excusing it, about how forgiveness, when it came, didn't come all at once. It came in small increments like light through a window that opens by degrees. She was not there yet. Fully, she was on her way. She thought that was enough. Her phone buzzed again. "Sophie, what are you doing tonight?" "I have leftover lasagna and I found a documentary about women who start businesses in their 40s that I think will either inspire you or make you furious, and I want to watch your face." Amelia laughed. Out loud in her empty office, she laughed the way she had laughed on Fifth Avenue after Evelyn's meeting. That surprised, genuine, whole-body laugh that had nothing performed in it. She typed back, "I'll be there at 7. Save me the corner piece." She closed her laptop. She put on her coat. She turned off the light in her office and walked out through the Whitmore Wellness headquarters, past her team, past Maya at the front desk who told her she had 3 messages, which Amelia said she would handle in the morning, past the wall near the entrance where she had hung. In the first week they'd moved in, a framed print with 4 words on it. "Build something that lasts." She paused in front of it for a moment. She thought about what lasted. Not companies, not necessarily. Not reputations, not always, not even relationships, as she had learned in the most thorough possible way. What lasted, she had come to understand, was the work you did on yourself. The choices you made about what kind of person to become when the things that defined you were taken away. The way you handled being wrong, being reduced, being invisible, being underestimated, being hidden, being released into a world that had not been expecting you and did not know what to do with you. The way you chose anyway to show up. She touched the frame briefly. Then she walked out the door and down the stairs and out into the Brooklyn evening, which was cold and particular and completely indifferent to her history, and she pulled her coat close and started walking toward the subway. Toward Sophie and lasagna and a documentary that would probably make her laugh. Toward the simple, sustaining, extraordinary fact of her own life. She did not look back at the building. She had built it. It would be there when she returned. Some things, when you built them right, stayed. The invitation arrived on a Wednesday morning in a cream envelope with the Forbes logo embossed in the upper left corner, and Amelia's assistant Maya brought it to her desk with a particular expression she wore when something was significant enough to hand-deliver rather than leave in the stack. Amelia opened it while she was still on a call. She read it. She set it on the desk. She finished the call. Then she picked it up and read it again. Forbes Women's Summit. Main stage. An audience of 1,400 industry leaders, investors, journalists, and entrepreneurs. The slot they were offering her was not the warm-up slot, not the mid-afternoon slot that people attended while mentally checking their phones. They were offering her the closing keynote, the last voice of the day. The one people remembered on the drive home. She put the letter down and looked at the wall across from her desk where the 4-word print hung, the one she passed every time she left the building. Build something that lasts. She picked up her phone and called Evelyn. "I got the Forbes invitation," she said when Evelyn answered. "I know," Evelyn said. "I recommended you. You didn't tell me. I wanted you to get it on your own merits. Not feel like you owed me the yes." A pause. "Are you going to do it?" Amelia looked at the letter. At the date 6 weeks away, at the words closing keynote printed in clean black type. Yes, she said, I'm going to do it. She heard Evelyn exhale. Not the professional exhale, not the one she used in boardrooms. The real one from someone who had watched a woman start from nothing and had been paying close attention to where she was going. Good, Evelyn said. I'll be in the front row. Amelia hung up. She sat at her desk for 60 seconds doing nothing except feeling the full weight of what she had just agreed to. 1,400 people. Main stage. The closing keynote of one of the most watched business events in the country. The woman who had once waited in a black car in a parking lot while a ballroom door, closed in her face, was going to stand on a stage and be the last voice 1,400 people heard. She picked up her pen, she opened her notepad, she started writing. The keynote took 4 weeks to write, not because she didn't know what she wanted to say, she knew immediately, had known for years, had been living the material in the most direct possible way, but because the difference between knowing something and to 1,400 people on a main stage was the difference between having a voice and learning to use it in a room that was much larger than any room you'd been in before. She wrote 12 drafts. She read every one of them out loud. Alone in her office after hours, the way she had once read Nathaniel's pitch decks aloud to test which words landed and which ones fell flat. She knew the difference between a sentence that worked on paper and a sentence that worked in a human voice, and she was not willing to stand in front of 1,400 people and deliver anything less than something that worked. Sophie listened to draft 7 over video call and cried at the end, which Amelia took as a positive sign. Maya read draft 9 and told her the third section needed to move faster, which was correct and which Amelia fixed before the day was out. Evelyn read draft 11 and said one thing, the part about the car. Keep the part about the car. Amelia had almost cut it. It was the most personal part, the most exposed, the part where the professional scaffolding fell away, and what was left was just a woman in a parking lot and a door closing and the very specific sound of being told you were nobody by the person who was supposed to be most certain you were somebody. She had written it and then sat back from it with the particular discomfort of seeing something true on paper. True things she had learned always felt like too much at first. That was usually how you knew they were right. She kept the part about the car. 3 days before the summit, she was in her office running the keynote for the last time when Maya knocked. There's someone here, Maya said. He doesn't have an appointment. He says his name is Nathaniel Carter. He says he'll wait if you're busy. Amelia stopped. She had not seen Nathaniel since the coffee shop in Carroll Gardens. 6 weeks ago, she had received one text from him in that time, brief and businesslike, asking a question about a Carter Global document that had been misdirected to his personal email. She had answered it the same day, equally brief and businesslike, and that had been the sum of their contact. She had not expected him here. In her building, tell him I have 10 minutes, she said. Maya nodded. She came back 2 minutes later and Nathaniel Carter walked through the door of Amelia's office for the first time. He looked different from the coffee shop. He was dressed well but not formally, and there was something about him that was different from both the boardroom version and the Sunday morning version. Something she couldn't immediately name. He looked around the office, briefly taking it in, and she watched his face while he did. He was seeing she understood what she had built. The specific physical reality of it, the real space of her real company. The high ceiling she had chosen and the large windows and the print on the wall that said build something that lasts and the desk covered in draft pages of a keynote she was giving in 3 days to 1,400 people. This is yours, he said. It wasn't quite a question. All of it, she said. He sat down in the chair across from her desk. She stayed behind the desk. That was intentional, and they both knew it was intentional, and neither of them commented on it. I heard about the Forbes keynote, he said, main stage. Closing slot, news travels. You're going to be extraordinary, he said. Just that. Flat and certain, not performing anything. She looked at him. What are you doing here, Nathaniel? He pressed his hands on his knees. The familiar gesture. I'm leaving New York, he said. I wanted to tell you in person. She hadn't expected that. She held the surprise without showing it. Where are you going? Colorado. Initially, I have a property there. I don't know exactly what I'm going to do. Something smaller. Something that I actually care about, rather than something I care about being seen caring about. He paused. There's a difference, it turns out. There is, she said. I know I'm not owed a goodbye, he said. I know that's not something you owe me. But he stopped. He tried again. I have spent 3 years understanding what I did to you. Not in a general way, specifically every specific choice. The IPO press conference, every dinner, every time I handed you an excuse dressed up as a reason. He held her gaze directly. No flinching, and I wanted to say it to your face. In your office, in the place you built from nothing, while I was busy watching everything I'd built fall apart. I'm sorry, not the letter version, not the text version. The actual version, looking at you in this room. The office was quiet. Amelia looked at him for a long time. She thought about all the moments she had wanted this. In the early years, when she was still rearranging what she heard into something bearable. In the later years, when she had stopped rearranging and started simply surviving. In the parking lot in the dark, in the dress she had put on, thinking she might finally be invited in. She had wanted exactly this, the real apology, the undefended one. And here it was. She felt something release in her chest. Not dramatically, not the way it happened in movies, some great wave of catharsis, just a small, quiet relief. The way a door opens after you've been pushing against it for a long time, and then suddenly the handle gives, and the door swings in the air. On the other side is just air. Just regular air, not the charged and complicated air you'd imagined. I hear you, she said. He waited. I believe you, she said. His jaw worked. He looked at his hands. I'm not going to tell you it's all right, she said. Because some of it isn't and won't be. But I'm also not going to tell you that I haven't. She paused, finding the right words, the precise ones. That I haven't arrived somewhere in the last year in terms of understanding that you were afraid. Not excusing it. Just understanding it. Fear makes people do things that love should prevent. And you let fear run you for a long time. I did, he said. You don't have to do that anymore, she said, wherever you go. You can just be who you are. The real version. It's smaller than the other one, but it fits better. She paused. I say that from experience. He made the sound again. That half-law that was also something else. You're being remarkably kind to me, he said. I'm being honest, she said, which is always a form of kindness I understand better than most. He stood. She stood. They were on the same side of the desks now in terms of the moment, even if the desk was still between them. Take care of yourself, she said. You too, his voice was low. I'll watch from wherever I am. The keynote, the next company, whatever you do next. I'll be watching, she nodded. Goodbye, Nathaniel, she said. Something moved across his face. The recognition of the finality in those two words. The way they closed something that had been open for a very long time. Cleanly and without cruelty, just the fact of a door that was done being a door. Goodbye, Amelia, he said. He walked out. She stood at her desk and listened to his footsteps go down the hallway, through the main office to the elevator. She heard the elevator arrive. She heard the doors open and close. She sat back down. She looked at her keynote draft on the desk. She picked up her pen. She added one line to the third section, the part about the car, that she had not been able to find before. The line said, "The moment you realize someone has been hiding you is not the end. It is, if you let it be, the beginning of something they will never be able to reach." She underlined it once, then she went back to work. The night before the Forbes summit, Amelia did not sleep well. Not from anxiety she had done the work, she had the words. She knew her material the way you know something you have lived inside, but from the particular restlessness of a person on the eve of something significant, when your body understands before your mind does that tomorrow is going to be a day you remember. She lay in the dark, and she thought about the people who had shaped this speech without knowing they were shaping it. She thought about Evelyn in a coffee shop sitting down uninvited and asking what she was reading. She thought about Sophie on a couch with cereal at 11 at night, asking sharp questions about a pricing model. She thought about Maya reading draft 9 and saying the third section needs to move faster with the directness of someone who understood that honesty was a form of respect. She thought about Victoria Carter's text, 2 words she had sent back. Thank you. She thought about what it had cost Victoria to send it and what it had cost Amelia to dismiss it with this as a dismiss it or letting it undo her. She thought about 87,000 women, the folder on her laptop, the messages she still read every one of every single one. She thought about who was coming to hear her speak tomorrow. She knew the demographics of the Forbes Summit audience. Executives, investors, journalists, and in the crowd, she had been told, somewhere in the 1,400 seats. People who had come specifically because they had followed her story, who had read the Inc. profile and the subsequent coverage, who had a Whitmore Wellness not as a product but as a permission structure, a proof that the life they wanted was not foreclosed by the body they lived in. She owed those women the truest version of what she knew. She fell asleep at 1 a.m. with that intention in her chest. Clear and settled, she woke at 6. She made coffee. She stood at her kitchen window. The city was still almost quiet. She thought about the last time she had stood at a window in a different apartment on a different floor, looking down at a city that was so far below her it felt unreal, feeling the particular cold of a life that was not hers. She thought about how far it was from that window to this one. Not in miles. In everything else, she got ready. She dressed carefully, the way she always did now, not with armor but with intention. She wore a deep jewel-toned dress, emerald green, and she stood in front of her mirror, and she looked at herself the way she had looked at herself for 4 years in this apartment, with the eyes of a woman who had finally, permanently, stopped apologizing for what she saw. She looked exactly right. She picked up her keynote notes, which she would not need because she knew every word. She took them anyway because having them was not weakness. It was preparation, and she was always prepared. She went to the Forbes Summit. The venue held the largest room in a midtown hotel, and it was full. She could hear it before she could see it. The particular low roar of 1,400 people settling into their seats, the sound of something large about to begin. She stood backstage and listened to that sound and felt, in her chest, the thing she had been feeling since she sat in a Carroll Gardens coffee shop and told Evelyn Harrington that the plus-size wellness market was being underestimated by 40%, and Evelyn had sat forward in her chair and said, "How much do you need?" She felt right, not comfortable. Not comfortable was not the goal. She felt right. The way you feel right when you are exactly where your life has been building toward, when all the accumulated choices and griefs and decisions and mornings of starting over have arrived at a point that is not a conclusion, but a beginning of a different order. The program director came to tell her 5 minutes. She nodded. Sophie texted, "I'm in row 7. I already cried twice and you haven't started yet." "Love you," she smiled. She put her phone in her pocket. The previous speaker finished. The applause rose and fell. The program director said, "Ready?" And she said, "Yeah." And she walked out onto that stage. The lights were warm and the audience was large, and she walked to the podium the way she walked through Brooklyn every morning, with her shoulders back and her chin level and no apology in any part of her body. The room settled into quiet. She looked out at 1,400 faces. She found Sophie in row 7. She found Evelyn in the front row, composed and watchful and exactly who she had always been. She found Diane Chen, 3 rows back, who had voted for her in a boardroom and called her afterward and built, over the months of the restructuring, something that was turning into a genuine professional friendship. She did not look for Nathaniel. He was in Colorado. He had said goodbye. She looked at the room. She began. She did not start with data. She did not start with her title or her company or the Whitmore Wellness valuation or the Inc. profile or any of the scaffolding that people used to tell audiences who they were supposed to be listening to. She started with the car. She said, "I want to tell you about the night I sat in the back of a car in a parking lot, in a dress I had put on because I thought I might finally be allowed inside, and listen to a door close between me and the life I had believed I was living." The room went completely still. She told the story. Not all of it, not the version she had lived through, with all its private architecture of grieved mornings and reordered excuses and long elevators counted down. The version that was true and transferable. The version that could be heard by a woman in a size 20 dress who had been told for 30 years that luxury was not designed for her. And the version that could be heard by a woman in a size 6 suit who had spent 30 years telling herself she was finally in the room and not examining too closely whether the room was worth being in. She talked about what it meant to be hidden, not just by someone else, but by yourself. The ways we accommodate and rearrange and reinterpret until we have built such a structure of excuses over the truth that we mistake the structure for the truth itself. She talked about the moment of understanding, the coffee shop, the business card, the 4 days of work, and the pitch that came from not just a business plan, but from the specific knowledge of what it felt like to be told that certain spaces were not for you. She talked about building. She said, "I want to be clear about something. What I built is not a revenge story. I know people love a revenge story. I know the narrative of the woman who was underestimated and then returned to prove her detractors wrong is a satisfying story. But it's not my story. My story is not about proving anything to anyone who doubted me." She paused. "My story is about proving something to myself, about discovering that the woman I had been trying to fit into someone else's idea of acceptable had been, this entire time, extraordinary on her own terms, and that the only permission I needed was the kind I could only give myself." She heard something move through the room. Not applause, it wasn't that kind of moment. Something more internal, the particular collective intake of breath that happens when a room of people hears something that is true in a way that is personal to each of them. She kept going. She talked about the 87,000 women and the folder of messages and the one that she read when the old voice tried to come back, The one from a woman in her 60s in rural Georgia who had written, "I spent 40 years believing that things like this weren't meant for someone who looked like me. You made me understand that I had been wrong about myself. I don't know how to thank you for that. I am starting over at 63. I thought you should know." She did not read the whole message. She had it memorized. She gave the room the shape of it, the essential fact of a woman at 63 starting over, and she let the room feel the weight of that, the weight of how much time people spent waiting for permission, the weight of what became possible when someone finally said, "You do not need permission. You are already enough. You were always already enough." At the 40-minute mark, she arrived at the part Evelyn had told her to keep. She said, "The night I sat in that car, the door closed between me and a room full of people who didn't know I existed. And the man I had loved for 11 years walked through it. And for years afterward, I thought that was the moment my story broke. I thought that was the fracture point, the place where everything I had built came apart." She paused. "It wasn't," she said. "It was the moment my real story started. Because the woman who sat in that car in the dark, in the dress she had put on, hoping to be invited in, that woman had no idea what she was capable of. She had spent 11 years being capable in someone else's name. She had never had the chance to find out what she could do in her own." She paused again. The room was with her. She could feel the room with her the way you feel wind, not just on one side but all around. "I am here today," she said. "Not despite being hidden. I am here because of what I found when I came out of hiding. I found a company I loved. I found work that was mine. I found a self that had been patient and persistent and was still there, still intact, still entirely capable of beginning again." She looked out at the room, at all of it, all 1,400 faces and the weight of all the stories in them. "And I am standing in front of you today to tell you one thing with absolute certainty. If someone in your life is hiding you, if someone has decided that who you are is too much, or the wrong shape or not the right image, they are not protecting you. They are protecting themselves, and the moment you understand, that is not the worst moment of your life. It is the first moment of the next one." The silence lasted exactly 3 seconds. Then the room broke open. The applause was not polite applause, not the professional applause of an industry event. It was the kind of applause that is really something else. That is really a room full of people recognizing something they have been carrying and putting it down, briefly in the presence of someone who has already put it down and lived to tell them what it felt like. She stood at the podium and let it come. In row 7, Sophie had both hands over her mouth and was not even trying to manage her expression. In the front row, Evelyn was applauding with the steady, deliberate force of someone making a point. Diane Chen, 3 rows back, was on her feet. Amelia looked at all of it. She felt the full, unguarded, specific reality of this moment, and she did not try to reduce it or contain it or be modest about it, because modesty in the face of something you have genuinely earned through genuine loss and genuine work is not humility. It is just another form of making yourself smaller. She was done making herself smaller. She let the moment be exactly as large as it was. She stepped back from the podium, and then she walked off that stage the same way she had walked onto it, with her shoulders back and her chin level and no apology in any part of her body, through the applause and into the wings, where the program director was waiting with wide eyes, and Maya was standing with her phone, saying 12,000 social mentions already, and Sophie had somehow gotten backstage and threw her arms around Amelia's neck before she had fully cleared the curtain. She held her sister. She let Sophie hold her. "You did it," Sophie said into her shoulder. "You absolutely did it." "I know," Amelia said. She said it without performance and without false modesty and without any of the reflexive self-diminishment she had spent years unlearning. She said it the way you say a fact that is simply true and does not require decoration. She knew she had done it. This was not the end of knowing. It was just the latest and largest proof of something she had understood for 4 years now, since the morning after a night on a couch in Hoboken, when she had sat in a small kitchen in the early gray light and told her sister, "I want it to look like mine." It looked like hers, all of it. The company and the stage and the 87,000 women and the folder and the keynote that had just moved 1,400 people to their feet. The charcoal blazer and the burgundy suit and the emerald dress. The Brooklyn apartment with the plants on the windowsill and the mess on the counter. The morning walks and the calls with Sophie and the work that was hers, in a way that nothing in her previous life had been. All of it was hers. She had built every piece of it herself. From a business card picked up in a coffee shop, from 4 days of work and a handshake, from the clear-eyed decision made in a divorce lawyer's office with the East River wind at her back, to take only what she had earned and go earn the rest herself. from the refusal made in the most private possible way, in the dark on a couch in Hoboken, to let shame be the last word about her. Later that night she sat at Sophie's kitchen table, which was where they always ended up, and they ate leftover lasagna from the corner piece that Sophie had saved and drank wine and talked until midnight. And Sophie told her 3 times that the keynote had been the best thing she had ever seen, and Amelia told her twice to stop exaggerating. And Sophie said she was not exaggerating even slightly, and showed her the social media coverage to prove it, which was extensive, and which they both looked at for approximately 3 minutes before putting the phone face and the lasagnas instead. Because the lasagna was there and it was real, and the company of her sister was the truest form of richness Amelia had ever known. Before she left, standing in Sophie's hallway with her coat on, Sophie said, "What's next?" Amelia looked at her. She thought about the Whitmore Wellness spring line, about the keynote invitation she had already received from 2 other conferences in the wake of tonight, about the mentorship program she had been drafting for 2 months, a structured program for women starting businesses in the second half of their lives, women who had been told explicitly or implicitly that it was too late, that the window had closed, that the person with permission to begin again was not them. She thought about starting over at 63. She thought about what she knew and what she had earned the right to say she knew. Everything, she said. Sophie smiled. Amelia walked out into the night and started the walk to the subway, through Brooklyn, through the city that was loud and specific and completely indifferent to her in the most liberating way, and she felt with each step the accumulated weight of everything she had carried and set down, the grief and the shame and the years of making herself smaller, and the parking lot and the closed door and the silence that had once been her answer. She had carried it and she had set it down, and what remained, now that the weight was gone, was not emptiness, it was room. Room for everything that was coming, everything she was going to build. Every woman she was going to reach, every morning she was going to wake up to work that was hers, and a life that fit her, and a self she did not have to apologize for or minimize or hide. She had been hidden once, she had walked out of hiding, and she was never, for the rest of her life, going back. That was the whole of the story, not the beginning, not the end, but the irreversible, hard-won truth of it. A woman who had been told she was nobody had looked that word in the eye, handed it back to the man who'd said it, and built something so undeniably real that the only appropriate response was to say her name, Amelia Whitmore Carter, out loud in every room she walked into for the rest of her life.